Thank you very much, Dries, for the introduction, and thank you also very much for inviting me to this conference. I was actually here in Białowieża in 2012 doing a postdoc, and I had such an amazing and very nice and also a pretty productive time here. Also, thanks to you being here, despite the party yesterday that I heard went late for someone. I think I missed this. I went to bed too early. That was not a good choice, but maybe a good choice for now. I'm actually a little bit worried for this talk. A few weeks ago, I got a hole in my head. So sometimes I think something and I say something totally different. So we will see what happened during this talk, but I will just blame all my errors on this hole in my head. So that's actually pretty convenient to have that to blame on. So predators may affect their prey either directly or indirectly. So direct effects occur by predators killing the prey, and that affects the mortality rate of the prey population. That in turn may affect the population growth and also population size. But there are several factors that may affect the strength of those interactions. So it may be affected by the compensatory mortality. So if predators are killing prey that would die of some other reason, starvation, for example, it will be a less direct effect. Also, the selection for different age and sex classes are important. So if predators are killing mainly the adult segment of the population, they will have a larger impact on their prey population than if they are mainly killing calves. And also the availability of other large predator in the ecosystem, and also alternative prey species also do influence sort of the direct effects that predators have on their prey species. And then we have the indirect effects, and that is when prey change their behavior in response to predation. But those behavior changes are costly, and they may affect, for example, body weight, reproduction, or survival negatively. And therefore, prey species can have different numbers of strategies to avoid the risk of predation. For example, increase their vigilance levels, or changing their group size or habitat choice, for example. And those indirect effects may actually have pretty large effects on the prey populations. So, and then a few words about trophic cascades. So the impact of predators on prey through either direct or indirect effects can also cascade down to node-adjacent trophic levels. So, for example, we can have effects on the vegetation due to altered browsing pressure, either through direct predation that change the density of the prey population, or by indirect effects that change the behavior, how prey move in the environment. And then we also have humans. So it's been shown that humans kill adult prey at a 14 times higher median rate than other predators, and also that different activities from human affect all trophic levels. So we have heard during this conference about habitat alterations through, for example, forestry, agriculture, that affect the resource abundance in the system, and also humans affect both the number and the demography, both of prey species, in particular ungulate species that are hunted to a large extent, but also the number and the demography of predator species. So, but those large predators also affect the human use of natural resources. And in this talk, I will focus on how wolves affect hunter-harvest, mainly on moose. So hunter-harvest in big parts of Europe have a long cultural tradition, and also constitutes both economic and recreational value. And therefore, those re-establishment of large predators that we have had during the last decades in Europe for sure compete with humans over the same prey species. So here, this map here just shows that 90% of the area in Europe hosts up to 5 ungulate prey species. And also we have had re-establishments of large carnivores going on in Europe now for some decades. So here you just see the distribution of brown bears, wolves, and lynx. And in Europe, there is at least one large carnivore species in 30% of the area. So now we will zoom into the Scandinavian wolf population. So as you see on the previous map, we have wolves in Sweden, we have brown bears, we have lynx, we have also wolverines. They are particularly up in the northern part of Sweden, but are actually increasing their distribution range also down to the southern parts of Scandinavia where we have. So we have actually 4 large carnivores in our study area. So the Scandinavian population have been monitored both through numbers, their distribution, and also their genetical status since the founder events of this population that occurred in 1983. So I will now just show you sort of how the distribution of this population have looked like since the 1980s. So you see it on this map here. You do not. What happened to this pointer? It's off. Sorry. Very much. Aha, okay, good. So here you will see. So in 1983, the first wolves established in this part of Scandinavia, and now you just see this it's a wolf territory density in 5-year intervals. So you can see here that we have more and more territories establishing for each year. And here is how it looks like up to 2017. So you see here the distribution have been pretty similar during this time period. And this is actually the distribution range during the last monitoring season. And you see here we still have like this distribution range that we have had since the 1980s, but now wolves are actually also establishing in the southern part of Sweden. And here's pretty interesting because here we have actually 5 different ungulate prey species. But I guess I will save that to maybe the next conference. And you also see here that it's no wolves in northern Scandinavia, and that is because there we have the reindeer husbandry area, and we are not supposed to have any reproducing wolves in this area. So in this area, before the wolves returned in the 1980s, it's been sort of absent from wolves during at least 100 years. So that was the distribution range. So now just looking at saying some few words about the population size. So we have a pretty high increase in populations up to here 2012, and then it's been more stable, and that is actually due to license harvest. So the managers aim at keeping this wolf population at approximately the same level. So this is showing the number of territories with wolves, and this is the total number of territories. So this represents among 450 wolves in Sweden and Norway. So you have seen some photos now from Scandinavia, both during John Linnell's and Lena Gustafsson's talk. So I will just show you this one. This is actually the border between Sweden and Norway. You have Sweden here, you have Norway there. And here are some examples of those large clear cuts that are more common in Sweden than in Norway. And the border is not fenced, so it's just like an open area like this in the forest. So many of those results that I will show you today are based on information from GPS-collared wolves. So we capture wolves during winter. It's a pretty large operation that includes a lot of snow tracking on the ground, and then we use helicopters to capture them. And we have done this since 1998. So now we go back to those direct effects. So the direct effects of predators on their prey populations, they will be larger if they mainly consume prey that they have killed by themselves. So what we did, since they are killing, prey species from large moose to beaver and badger, for example, we just looked at the consumption time. So how much time do wolves spend within 200 meters from different food sources? And we did that using all the GPS data that we have collected during the years. And we divided this consumption time in 4 different categories. So first it was wolf killed, so prey that the wolf killed by themselves. Other cause of death, for example, starvation, if they consume something that they're from starvation. Anthropogenic origin, that is prey that have been killed through vehicle accidents or remains after a hunter harvest that is left in the forest from hunters. And we also have a proportion here with unknown cause of death. And as you see here on this photo, it's pretty obvious that wolves spend most time on prey that they have killed by themselves. But we can actually look a little bit more into detail what it is that they actually consume. And the larger part that they eat is ungulates that are fresh, that they have killed during our study periods. And the main part of those ungulates are also moose, and the smaller part are roe deer. So they switch to roe deer if just the densities are high enough, but moose is their main prey species. But wolves are not that picky, so they do not mind going back and consuming prey that they killed a number of months earlier, particularly during winter when those remains actually stay pretty fresh. Also domestic animals. Here they only spend very little time because most of those ones, when it happens, those carcasses are removed by humans, so it's not much time here that the wolves will actually consume them. It's pretty rare that wolves kill other wolves. We have a number of predation on red foxes. Sometimes, like here, they actually consume them, but most often they just kill them. And the last proportion here consists of small prey, and this is most common during summer, where they actually consume quite a lot of both beaver badgers and also some forest grouse species. So you see here the proportion of food sources that they consume but they haven't killed by themselves is actually pretty small, and most of them are also ungulate remains. And we have this proportion here that is unknown. My guess would be that this is also their own kills that we just were not able to determine the cause of death. So we have a predation rate by wolves on moose that actually have changed over time. So until 2015, when calculating, okay, how many moose are killed by wolves per territory and year, we had this, I think that's the sentence that I have said most during my working life, that, okay, wolves kill approximately 120 moose per year, independent on pack size, and if alternative prey species are low. But during the latest year here, when we have continued to study predation, we actually see that they have reduced their kill rate, and we have a lower average during those latest years. And we have two likely explanations for this. One is that in contrast to the previous studies where they mainly consume calves, they are actually now predating on a larger proportion of adult moose. And also, we have now generally lower moose densities in Scandinavia, and we have also seen a correlation with that moose do kill a little bit more moose when moose densities increase. And also what you can expect when, as you see on those maps earlier, that we have had a denser wolf population and that we will have density-dependent effects on, for example, territory size. And we see this in some, sorry. That was better. Okay, yeah. So territory size is, for the earlier studies, approximately 1,000 square kilometer. And here, during the latest years, you see a pretty big variation. So we have some indications that territories are decreasing in size, but we still sort of need some more data to see what is happening with this. And also now the population size of wolves are actually decreasing, so we will see if this was just during some years where we had those density-dependent effects. But regarding the predation pressure, so up till 2015, wolves kill approximately 0.10 moose per square kilometer. And as you see here, we have a pretty large variation during the latest years, but due to that wolves kill fewer individuals, but also on a smaller territories, we actually end up with a similar predation pressure during those last years. But what we think is that wolves actually will have a higher impact on the moose population now, since they are killing a larger proportion of the adult segment of the population. So, there seems to be room for also having indirect effects by wolves on moose in Scandinavia due to this pretty high predation rate that we have. So we started with doing those studies pretty early, and we have done this for a number of behaviors on moose. So I will now just give you some details on one of the studies and then just talk a little bit brief about the other ones. So we studied the travel speed and the direction of movements using both collared wolves and collared female moose with GPS collars in relation to spatiotemporal differences in both wolf predation risk, reproductive status of the moose, and also time of year. So travel speed is here just measured like between two consecutive locations, and the direction of movements, that is how moose move in the landscape. So it's a value between 0 and 1, where either they move directionally or in a more concentrated way. So the wolf predation risk do differ between years. So here you see the wolf territory, and those are actually the moose home ranges. So we had a number of moose that was actually outside the wolf territories for some years, but then we have the establishment of a new pack. So we had all our moose actually were exposed to wolf predation. But then wolves do not move in the same way in their entire territory. So they have some peaks where they actually spend more time, and here we have a higher predation risk for some of those moose that actually have their home ranges where wolves spend most of the time. But you see here that we actually have moose that, even though they live inside a wolf territory, they may be actually exposed to the wolves very, very rare. So the results was pretty clear, showing that it was season and reproductive status that affected moose mobility. So the travel speed, it was highest during summer and lower for females having calves. And actually the same pattern for the direction of movement. Not surprisingly, we have a more concentrated movement for females having calves during early summer. And this variation in movement pattern for those female moose were most likely, it sort of followed the seasonal changes related to food quality and availability. And we did not find any support for that wolf predation risk affected the mobility of those female moose. So we have also looked at some other behavior of moose. So also daily and seasonal activity pattern. We didn't find any effects here either for avoiding wolf predation. We have studied defense and flight behavior of moose. And here we have also related this to the time since wolf establishment. So if you read the North American literature, there are a number of studies saying that if large predators have been away for a long time period but re-established, then their prey populations are actually pretty quickly to learn how to avoid being killed. So this can be this sort of change in behavior can occur already within a 5-year period. So we have studied this in territories where we actually have had wolves up to 20 years, but we see no effect of that they actually will be better of sort of defending themselves when they are attacked by wolves. So the wolves have a pretty high hunting success that seem to continue. And they are also easier to kill. You know, if we compare just sort of chasing distances, those are much shorter in Scandinavia than if we compare it to North American studies, where it's a number of much longer. Habitat choice by moose. Here we actually did see some very weak effects of that moose change their habitat a little bit during summer, but those effects were also pretty weak. Pretty interesting is that for group size, then we actually saw an effect for adult males. So the adult male moose are actually very rare predated by wolves. But what this study showed was that the adult males had the tendency to actually form larger groups within wolf territories compared to outside. This was for sure pretty surprising, but one reason here could be that since those anti-predator behavior are costly and some categories of prey species are actually better to handle this cost. So for the larger moose, being in a large group is less costly than, for example, for female with calves. So that is sort of the explanation that we had for that. So how come that we do not see that much changes in moose behavior, even though we have a pretty high predation rate by wolves on moose? So one reason is most likely that moose have lost their anti-predator behavior due to the absence of wolves during a long time period. Yes, but why do they not learn and actually start trying to avoid this predation? So one reason is that during those studies, we have had overall pretty large wolf territories in combinations with a high moose density. So there is actually a pretty low predation risk for individual moose, even if they are living inside wolf territories. But the most important factor is most likely this, that harvest is the main mortality factor also within most wolf territories. So in this graph here, you just see the estimated moose mortality rate on 4 different classes. So you see wolf predation in orange. We also have here predation of brown bear. You have harvest in green, and you also have traffic and other mortalities. So since harvest is the main mortality factor, it is not that surprising that wolves do not actually change their behavior in response to the establishment of wolves. So now some words about cascading effects. So ungulates can have different effects on the vegetation due to their foraging behavior, like browsing or bark stripping, for example. So we investigated if there will be a reduction in moose browsing damage on Scots pine through an effect of wolf predation on moose density. So we have access to actually 2 different moose browsing damage surveys that are conducted annually in Sweden. So what we did was that we're using those surveys of the browsing damage on pine, and we investigated both the effect of presence of wolves and also duration, how long have there been wolf territories in the area. And then we also included those factors that we actually know affect moose browsing damage level. So, for example, moose abundance, the availability of forage, tree species composition, snow depth, and also different infrastructure, mostly regarding to roads. So, a bit surprising, we actually did not find that the browsing level decreased inside wolf territories. We actually found the opposite, that it was increasing moose browsing levels within wolf territories. But as you see here, we had a huge data set, and we actually have a statistically significant effect here, both when comparing inside wolf territories and outside, and also that it seemed to increase with time. But actually, those were mainly statistical differences and most likely not biological relevant. And we did then find that those other factors that are known to affect the browsing level actually had the expected effect on moose browsing level. So both moose densities and snow depth. So then we also did an additional study, also looking at the browsing level. And also here, we found that we had a higher moose abundance within wolf territories. And this can be due to two causes. One is that wolves actually select to establish their territories in areas with high moose density, or that hunters do overcompensate for wolf predation. When they know that they have wolves establishing on their hunting ground, they actually overcompensate and harvest less moose than they actually have if they will just compensate for wolf predation. So this actually leads into my last topic, and that is the impact that wolves have on human use of natural resources. And here we will focus on harvest of moose. So hunters have actually responded in three different ways since the 1980s when wolves were establishing in Scandinavia. So the first thing that we saw, that was that actually hunters immediately, during the first hunting season, when they have wolves on their hunting ground, they actually reduce their harvest to compensate for wolf predation. But they actually reduce it a little bit too much, so more than they actually have to. And they do it both for the total harvest, but also reduce the harvest on adult females. And that is also, if you want to sort of compensate for predation, you know, harvesting less of the adult segment, the females, is a good way to do it. So what we did here, during the early years, we could investigate and see the harvest 5 years before wolves established, and then the wolves actually established here between year 5 and 6, and then we could follow it for 5 additional years here. And we compared that to control areas without wolves. So as you see here, yes, the harvest decreased also in the control areas, but we had this immediate reduction in harvest already the first year. And then it was actually lower during this 5-year period than in the adjacent control areas. But here you also see this indication that actually wolves establish themselves in areas with high moose density, or at least where we had the highest moose harvest. There is a correlation that may not always happen, but in most cases. So that happened during the first years after wolf establishment. But then we did another study where we actually invested this both in Sweden and Norway, and we did it during a longer time period from 1995 to 2017. And this figure here showing the harvest, how it differs in Sweden here in blue and in Norway in red. So the harvest do differ between those time periods. And part of this variation is explained by wolf predation. So when we compare hunting areas that have an average wolf territory density with areas that have no wolves. Hunters reduce their harvest yield with between 40 to 50%. So they do this for the total harvest. Then it was pretty interesting in those two countries. We had some different effects of how hunters in Norway and Sweden did it for calves. So actually in Sweden, the hunters are reducing their harvest on calves, most likely to compensate for that the calves are the main category that wolves kill. But in Norway, instead, they are harvesting a higher proportion of calves. Here, for sure, we need also moose densities. That is not included in this long-term studies, but of course here that is also something that is relevant to include, and also the sort of what managers and the hunters have their goal with the moose population, but that is also not included in this study. And also here we saw the same that we did in the previous study, that the hunters both in Norway and Sweden, they decrease their harvest on adult female moose, an efficient way then to compensate for wolf predation. So moose density is for sure something that affects the wolf predation rate on moose, and also the possible harvest yield that you can have. So in 2012, in Sweden, it was introduced a new moose management system that actually allows following the harvest, following moose observation rates in the same hunting units. So here I just want to show you how the harvest looks like spatially. So here in those blue areas, we have had a reduction in harvest during the study period that was between 2012 and 2017. So you see here, particularly those areas, the harvest was reduced, and you see those black borders, and that is the wolf territory density. So the thicker the border is, the higher wolf territory density. So here you see, okay, a lot of wolves, hunters reduce their harvest. Then we have some areas here where hunters actually increased their harvest rate. Then doing this similar map, but showing instead the moose observation rate. So hunters do observe moose during the first week of their harvest. And here we actually see the opposite pattern. So in those areas where harvest decreased, moose observation rate increased. So it seemed here that, okay, we have a adaptive management where hunters, they compensate for wolf predation, leading to that they will have an increase in moose density. So we have sort of had this pattern from hunters up to a few years ago. So, but what we actually have seen now during the last years, that is that the harvest actually increase despite that we have a high wolf territory density in different hunting areas. So you see here the same pattern as I showed before, that the harvest decrease with increasing wolf territory density. But during the last years here, 2019 and 2020, Swedish hunters actually increased their harvest, independent of that there actually is a high wolf territory density on their hunting grounds. And the reason for this is most likely related to moose browsing damages. Because in Sweden, this is a pretty hot debate at the moment. It's high browsing damage levels in many areas in Sweden, and the moose populations hunters are actually increasing their harvest on moose to in some way try to reduce those browsing levels. So we will see what actually happens then in the future. So this is just a pattern that we have seen now during the last years. So now I will just finish with some words about tolerance levels. So Sweden and Norway, we are two neighboring countries, and pretty similar in many ways, but I will just show you here one example here regarding tolerance levels, and also referring a little bit back to John Linnell's talk on Monday. So Norway and Sweden have two different methods to survey browsing damages on Scots pine. So in Norway, they survey the percentage of browsed shoots, and in Sweden, it's the percentage of damaged stands. And then those ones are classified in different classes here. So those green dots here are showing that the degree of browsing is pretty low, and the black ones, that we just have a few on here, are indicating that it's over-browsing occurring in those areas. So we had a study area that we first surveyed with the Norwegian methods, and then we did the same but using the Swedish method of browsing damage instead. And then it looks like this. So a pretty different pattern. So what's in Norway is, here it's actually, the Norwegian actually don't see much problem with the high browsing damage levels, and they actually want to increase the moose population a bit. But in Sweden, it's the totally different pattern, and you know that it's very, very hard to conduct forestry in a lot of areas due to those severe browsing damage levels that we have. One thing here that do differ between Sweden and Norway, that is the ownership of the forest. So in Norway, it's much more private landowners, while in Sweden we have a lot of more bigger forest companies. So that may be one reason for these differences. But for this, we also see effects of the harvest. So in Sweden, there are in many hunting units, the goal is to actually reduce the moose population to reduce the moose browsing damage level. So what we actually have is here, the more red it is, the higher is the harvest outtake of moose. So you see here that they harvest pretty lot of moose on the Swedish border, but in Norway they harvest less moose to try to sort of increase the moose population instead. And one thing that also adds to this system is that we also have a migrating moose population in this area that do not make the management easier. So just some very brief conclusions from Scandinavia. So we have a very strong human impact on all trophic levels in Scandinavia through harvest and forestry. And this reduce both indirect effects and also cascading effects by wolves on moose and also on the browsing damage levels. So the behavior of humans when competing with large predators over the same prey resource is a key factor for the ecological effects that may occur when we have large predators in human-dominated landscapes. So those studies would not have been possible without funding and a lot of people that provide data from for those studies that I'm very grateful for, and I'm also grateful for you that listened and stay awake. Okay, thank you very much.